Hey, what's up everyone, and welcome to another episode of Weekly Code Quickies, your podcast for the latest tech news, coding tricks and tips, and more. As always, I'm your host, Norbert PM, and in this episode of the podcast, I'll be giving you my personal 10, I think they're 10, I just dropped them down to 10 tips for beginner web developers. So, let's get into the show. Okay, so tip number 1, and this is so tempting to try. Tip number 1 is do not get into a framework. So if you never had any kind of contact with web development, I would not suggest that you get directly into the framework. There are great frameworks out there, Angular, React, Vue.js. They're exceptional. But if you lack the basic skills of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you'll just get confused. Now again, these frameworks are great for building large-scale web applications and yield exceptional results when they're done correctly. But you should stick to the basics. Learn HTML, learn CSS, learn JavaScript. It will save you a ton of trouble. And later on, I would suggest that you stick with one of them. That is depending on wherever you are and what are the job requirements for that zone. But then later on, tip your toes in each one of them. So if you're a React developer, try Angular and try Vue. If you're a Vue developer, try React and try Angular, and so far and so on. So stick with one, but also try out the others. But remember, these frameworks come and go. So sooner or later, and in my experience is sooner than later, things will change. But if you stick with the basics, you will not have any kind of trouble adapting to a new technology. And this can also then impact your job and your growth. If you stick with only one technology, and well, it will not happen from one day to another, but changes will happen. And you know, there are the early adapters, which will take on any kind of new technology and say, this is the best one. And then you sit there and no, it's not. This is the best one. And then time goes on, and more people will move on to another technology, and you will still stick with the old technology, and one day it will be obsolete. But if you stick to the basics, you will have no problem adapting, believe me. Which brings me to tip number 2, have a good foundations in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I cannot say this often enough. The internet is full with tutorials and courses on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You know, I also have them. Just go out there and get as much information as you can about these 3 technologies, and then move to a framework. I would even recommend sprinkling a little bit of SAS or SCSS there, just to try out different things and also get a bit of more advanced CSS features in there before moving on to any kind of framework. And also NPM and Node.js are a must before touching or thinking about touching a framework. But there is a point where you need to stop. Which also brings me to tip number 3, do not go too deep into certain technologies. Knowing the ins and outs of CSS and SAS and SCSS will not make you an expert. And also, who knows if that expertise is even needed? Now, maybe it is needed and I'm wrong. Maybe there are special niches where it is needed. And if that is your thing, then please feel free to do so. But at a certain point, you should move on to something higher. And you should try out different technologies. So, just stop and move on. And also, I'm going to move on to the next tip, which is tip number 4. Get out of tutorial hell and just create your own project. It doesn't matter how small or big. Just start creating something. But how? What should I create? It doesn't matter. Just take an existing project that you saw, that you built by following a tutorial or a course project, and rebuild it yourself on your own and adding your special thing to it. For example, if you made a to-do list, make out of it a shopping list, or make a car part list, or make a PC part list. Build your own PC with, that will be a great project. Build your own PC by using to-dos, and you can just click them off when they're done. That's pretty cool, I think. That's a cool project. Try it. Come on. But Again, I would suggest that you should start small and then scale up gradually. And then when you're up here, somewhere here, and you get stuck, and it's not a if you get stuck, but when you get stuck, then we're going to go to my next tip, tip number 5. Ask for help. Ask for help. Everybody needs help. Either you go on a Facebook group, or you go to Stack Overflow, or wherever you want, or you go to a Discord channel. Just ask for help. The community is exceptional. And if someone helps you, then thank them and move on to the next thing. And you will get stuck again, and then ask for help again. And then slowly but surely, you're going to develop. Just like we are developers, you're going to develop. Now, tip number 6. Give yourself time. Each one of us is different. We each have different brains, different backgrounds, different styles of learning. Give yourself time to learn. If you're stuck with something or you don't understand something, just let it go. Let it sit for a couple of days. Move on to something else. And then come back to that. Maybe stepping away from something is just what it needs. Just a bit of space between you and your problem. So give yourself time. And you should never compare yourself to someone else. Circumstances differ. So if you're trying to compare yourself, just think about it. If you're trying to compare yourself to someone else, then that someone else should have been born exactly in the same period of time, exactly in the same situation, have the exact possibilities as you had. Everything should be exactly the same, and then, not even then, you should compare yourself to them because you have different thoughts. You see something, you understand something, someone sees the same thing, understands something totally different. So give yourself time and don't compare yourself to anyone. And this brings me to my next tip. Do not become a zealot for any kind of technology. Now, what do I mean by that? There are those stubborn kind of people that swear by Angular is the answer to everything, or swear by React. React is the answer to everything. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe something is better built in Angular, something is better built in React, and something is just better built using vanilla JavaScript, if it's a small project, and just importing a couple of things. Maybe something's better to be prototype in Vue.js and then later built out in React. And that's just the way it is. Don't become a zealot to a certain technology. You could find yourself later on seeing the technology die, and all those bad voices from behind are gonna come and say, so what about that React you were upholding all those years? What happened to it? And you say, well, it kind of died. So don't become a zealot for everything. Now, you can have strong beliefs, although, and you can believe that this certain technology is exceptional and it has benefits. And this brings me to my next point. Do not be afraid to make mistakes. We all do. We all make mistakes. My best friend is Google. I have written code, the same code 100 million times, and still I have to look something up. That's just the way it is. You cannot memorize everything. This is not the idea that you memorize everything. It's the idea that you understand the code, that you understand what the consequences are, that you understand how something is built a better way in a certain circumstance. Let's just say we all make mistakes, and without them, we won't be able to grow. Without mistakes, you will never grow. Mistakes are necessary in your path as a developer. Now, tip number 9 would be to build your portfolio with your best 5 projects. Not more, only 5. And constantly keep updating them. What do I mean by that? You build 5 projects. Then you have a better project. Take that project, smash it in there, and pull out the one that you think is the worst from the top 5 projects. And then keep doing that. Each time you have a bestseller, put it in there. Take one out, put one in. Believe me, it works magic. Now, what about the rest of the projects? Don't throw them away. Use them. Use them as a stepping stone, as a documentation of your path. You will look back in a couple of years and see just how you developed. when I was looking back and saw, okay, this is the code that I have written 5 years ago, and this is the code that I'm writing now. This was the way I took knowledge, applied it. The way I apply knowledge today is totally different than I applied it 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And it's always awesome to look back and see what kind of dumb code you wrote. Now, my last tip, and this is true in any kind of path you will take, learning will never stop. And you should always be conscious about it. There will always be that new thing, that new tech, that new trend that will just keep coming and coming and coming. And you should, after a certain point, be able to absorb it, take what's important from it, and everything else just let pass. So remember, learning never stops, and you should be glad it doesn't. Okay, everyone, so that's it for this episode of the podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. Once again, I'm Norbert BM, and catch you next time. Bye-bye.